federal government through September of 2012, averting a shutdown that was set for midnight tonight. Senators are also waiting for the House to send over legislation extending the payroll tax cut. We may see that on the floor a little bit later today. And now live to the Senate floor here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, the world and all that is in it belong to you. You laid its foundations in the ocean depths by the power of your voice. Through your redemptive work, you brought peace on earth, goodwill to humankind. Lord, we need your peace today on Capitol Hill. Release your peace so that our lawmakers will find purity of motives, integrity of actions, and unity of purpose. Teach our senators your ways. Make yourself known to them today. Lord, we place our reliance squarely on your reliability as we pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 16, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Mark R. Warner, a Senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, to perform the duties of the Chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following later remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business. The Majority will control the first 30 minutes. Republicans will control the next 30 minutes. We expect to consider the omnibus spending bill within the next 24 hours or 36 hours. We also continue work on an agreement to consider the payroll tax compromise. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. As a reminder to all senators, cloture was filed on the motion to proceed H.R. 3630, House Republican payroll tax bill. Unless an agreement is reached, that vote will occur tomorrow morning. H.R. 3094 is at the desk and due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second reading.
H.R. 3094, an act to amend the National Labor Relations Act with respect to representation hearings and the timing of elections of labor organizations under that act.
I would object to any further proceedings at this time.
Objection is heard. Bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Chair announces the morning business, please.
In the previous order, leadership time is reserved. The Senate will be in a period of morning business until 12 p.m. The senators are permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the first hour equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first 30 minutes and the Republicans controlling the next 30 minutes.
Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois.
I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
So,
I ask the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
Mr. President, I hope we're drawing to a close here. We're not certain. There's still some unresolved issues, but the omnibus appropriations bill is moving forward, and it will fund our government for the remainder of this fiscal year. It's been a long and arduous process. We started by passing 3 appropriations bills in the Senate, and then when we tried to call the next 3, we ran into opposition. And so the Appropriations Committee, which I serve on, had to sit down and try to craft 9 separate spending bills and put them together in one. It was a long and involved and difficult process with the Financial Services Subcommittee, which I chair. Included in that committee jurisdiction are the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. These are the 2 government agencies responsible for watching Wall Street and the major financial institutions and markets across America. We are doing our best to not only restore America's confidence in some of these institutions that have been shaken by the recession, but also to make certain that it never happens again. There's resistance, primarily from the banking community and some financial institutions who don't want regulation even after the embarrassing failures of the last recession and the need for a federal government bailout. We need to make certain that at the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, there are adequate funds for them to do the job. I will tell you honestly that the underfunding of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission is a serious mistake. Serious. MFA Global has been the subject of repeated hearings on Capitol Hill as to what went wrong that led to the 8th largest bankruptcy in the history of the United States. Innocent people across America and the world have lost money. Some of them have lost their savings because of wrongdoing by someone. We still don't know whom. But the agency responsible for monitoring this activity, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, is facing a modest, almost immodest increase in appropriations this year when they desperately need more. This is an agency which has a budget of about $200 million in the last year. The administration had asked for $300 million for this year. We'll be lucky to come up with anything in the range of $215 million. That is a 7 or 8% increase in an agency which desperately needs more, not just for personnel, and they need them, the best professionals, but also for computer technology to keep up with the volume of trades taking place and to monitor activity so as to avoid embarrassment and exploitation. This notion by many on the other side of the aisle that we can starve these agencies and somehow end up with a stronger economy is completely upside down. The strength of the American economy, whether we're talking about Wall Street or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange or the Chicago Board Options Exchange, the strength is the fact that we are guided by the rule of law. We encourage and put into law standards of transparency, and we have oversight that is adequate to the job. This year's appropriation bill falls short of that mark. I'm also troubled by provisions in this bill, again this year, my subcommittee, where too many members of Congress, especially in the House of Representatives, clearly have missed their real calling in life. What they really wanted to be was not a member of Congress, but a mayor. And so, in their frustration, they decide that they will be a congressman from their district back home and a mayor, surrogate mayor for the District of Columbia. Over 800,000 American citizens and taxpayers live in this great city. They have nominally had home rule for decades, and yet time and again, year after year, they are subjected to those would-be mayors from all around America who impose standards on this city that they would never suggest in their own hometowns. It becomes a social experiment, primarily for the right wing. One of the programs each year that becomes a source of controversy is the needle exchange program. This program, exchanging needles and syringes, is the bridge to those who are addicted, to bring them out of their addiction into a healthy situation. Why would we do this in the District of Columbia? Because the incidence of HIV/AIDS infection in this city is the highest in the United States of America. That is the reality of life on the streets of Washington, a reality which those who've opposed this program refuse to acknowledge. The medical professionals step forward and say, do this. We can help make this a cleaner, healthier, safer city if you do it. And time again, some folks stand up in the House and say, oh, we're just going to get rid of that to show that we're opposed to intravenous drug use. Well, I'm opposed to it too. But I know that in addition to strong laws, we need thoughtful, common-sense solutions like the needle exchange program that are supported by medical organizations. The fact that that's not taking place in the way that it should is an embarrassment. And I'm sorry that that will be included in one part of this appropriation bill. Mr. President, before we leave, we need to do two things in addition to funding our government. We need to make certain that the payroll tax cut, which benefits 160 million Americans, continues after December 31st. This is a lifeline to many struggling families, and it is a way to insert into our economy the spending power of 160 million families buying goods and services that plays out into even more economic activity, more jobs and profitability. That's a must. The President insists on it. He's crossed America making that case. We cannot leave town without doing it. We are working on the final details today, and we should close that as quickly as possible to make certain there is no gap in this coverage of this payroll tax cut. Secondly, the maintaining of unemployment insurance benefits is absolutely essential for millions of Americans out of work. The amount of money they receive in UI benefits will allow them to keep their families together, not just during this holiday season, but for the months to come, so that while they're searching for a job, they're able to make basic payments so they don't lose a home, at least have a roof over their heads, and provide for the basic necessities of life for their struggling families. I can't believe that this has become a political football. I can still recall a time not that long ago when Republican and Democratic presidents would renew unemployment benefits without question, without demand that it be paid for because they knew it was essential, it was as caring and needy as disaster aid is. And now it's become a political football. We need to extend these unemployment benefits before we leave town, and we have to get that done. The President has insisted on it, and he is right. We know now with our high unemployment rate coming down slowly that we still need to provide this assistance to families. Were we to cut off these unemployment benefits, in my home state of Illinois, 148,000 people would lose their benefits. 148,000 people. What a happy holiday they would have, knowing that January 1st the benefits would no longer continue. Let's get this job done. Let's go home, at least with a clear mind that we have met our obligation to this economy and to the unemployed people across America, that we funded our government, and that we'll return next year, and I hope find a more congenial and bipartisan environment to work in. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, first of all, I'd like to thank the presiding officer for taking a few moments so I can make my statement. I want to again thank my friend, the senator from Illinois, for his comments. And let me start by saying that it's heartening to hear the comments the majority leader made that we are close to an agreement to make sure that we don't put the American people or the great federal workers through another one of these 11th-hour fire drills where we get to the brink of the precipice of shutting down our federal government. It's in that spirit that I rise today because, as many know, over the last year and a half or so, I have come here regularly to the floor of the Senate to continue a tradition that was started by Senator Kaufman from Delaware, where we recognize the contributions of great federal employees. And today, I'm pleased to honor another exceptional federal worker, Mr. John Merlino. Mr. Merlino is the Senate's Assistant Legislative Clerk, working on the legislative team on the Office of the Secretary of the Senate. Mr. Merlino began his Senate career in 1994 as a Senate doorkeeper. He then joined the Secretary's legislative staff and has performed many of its functions, including the constitutional task of maintaining the Senate Journal. Another of Mr. Merlino's main responsibilities is to call the roll during votes and quorum calls. More importantly, he is also one of those special workers on the dais who have been known at times to actually keep new members, as they preside over the Senate, awake during long stretches in the chair. He's always ready with a good sports quip. He's known for a person who goes above and beyond the call of duty. As a matter of fact, I know it was his birthday yesterday, and I've been planning this speech for some time. I wanted to make sure it was coincided with that important date for him. Secretary of the Senate Nancy Erickson noted that in addition to his hard work and attention to detail, and this is, I quote, "It is his great sense of humor that helps many of us keep smiling, especially during the Senate's late-night legislative sessions." A small cog in the greater legislative process, Mr. Merlino is a member of an often unrecognized but dedicated team that keeps the Senate running smoothly, and one that is charged with ensuring continuity of operation no matter what the situation. In fact, Mr. Merlino recently entered the history books. During a pro forma session held at the Postal Square building immediately following the earthquake in August, Mr. Merlino unknowingly became one of only 2 people, along with Senator Coons, to have spoken during the only official session of the Senate convened outside the Capitol building since 1814. The last time the Senate met outside the Capitol building for such a session was when the British troops burned the Capitol during the War of 1812. Again, so Mr. Merlino took his role in the history books of this great institution. I hope my colleagues, and I know the presiding officer, again, spelling me from the chair this morning to allow me to make this statement, will join me in honoring Mr. Merlino, a fellow Virginian, for the excellent work he and the legislative team do each and every day, and for their commitment to public service. And it's in that sense of Mr. Merlino's commitment to public service that I know the presiding officer joins me in this, and that we get our work done today so that we can give this team and the literally couple other million federal workers across the country the sense that we're not going to shut down the government. They're going to be able to go into the holiday season with the recognition that the government will continue operating, but more importantly, that so many of us recognize the great work they do to keep this country moving forward. So with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor, and again, thank my good friend, Mr. Merlino, for his good work.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The House gavelled in a short time ago at 10 o'clock this morning. General speeches for about 2 hours today in the Senate. The Senate takes up the House deal that was reached last night to fund the federal government. That money runs out at midnight tonight. The deal is about $915 billion, and it would run until September of 2012. The Senate is also waiting for the House to send over a payroll tax cut deal. And as you heard Majority Leader Reid say, that could hold votes. They could hold votes on that within the next 24 hours. Earlier today, we spoke with a Capitol Hill reporter who's covering the congressional agenda and the progress of talks on deals that are being worked on.
But to give us the contours of the deal and what we know about the politics of it, Manu Raju is a Politico congressional reporter. This is Politico's story on it this morning. David Rogers has the byline, Government Shutdown Dodge, Congress Finds Deal. But Manu Raju has been covering this all week. Good morning to you, and what can you tell the C-SPAN audience this morning about this deal?
Well, you're going to see it on the floor. It's probably going to pass The spending bill, basically it was agreed to after some of those controversial riders that Republicans had placed in the bill in order to target some of the administration policies that had generated a lot of Democratic opposition earlier in the week. Some of those were dropped, some of those were modified, most notably involving Cuba and involving targeting the administration's policy and from the Dodd-Frank Financial Services Law. Those languages were changed to enough to win enough Democratic support, so there will be most likely bipartisan support in the House to pass the bill today, and you're going to see that also in the Senate later today as well.
What does it do for overall spending levels? Since we've just gone through this special committee and there's been concern over the past year about the size of the debt and the deficit and federal spending, how does it all turn out with this particular piece of legislation, the compromise?
Well, when you compare it to last year's level, it's below last year's level. And a lot of this was agreed to during the Budget Control Act. Of course, that was the law that was enacted in August in order to increase the national debt ceiling. What they did there is they set an overall cap for federal spending for the next year of $1.043 trillion. And that represents a decrease from last year's level. This complies with that law. So what you will see is that is less than last year. It's not as low as some conservatives would like. So you'll probably see a lot of folks, conservative members, vote against this today. So. But what the proponents will say is, hey, this represents a cut from last year's level. This is a significant thing, and it's a sign that Congress is actually cutting spending. So
then a comment or two, please, from you on the other contentious debate, and that's the extension of the so-called payroll tax holiday.
That still is unresolved. There were marathon negotiations that were happening all day yesterday over extending the payroll tax holiday, and in addition to dealing with jobless benefits and dealing with the so-called doc fix, which would avert a scheduled pay decrease for physicians who serve Medicare physicians. The fight right now is over how to pay for those measures. They're still trying to deal with a year-long extension of those, but there are a lot of it really appears right now they're probably going to have to resort to a 2-month extension because the two sides cannot agree to how to cover the cost of that proposal. And right now we're looking at potentially a $40 billion 2-month extension that would be fully paid for by a number of different cuts. And then essentially back early next year in the spring, in the late winter, they're going to be fighting over this again.
Well, thanks very much. So after all the heat of the week, it looks like these bills will be voted on in Congress and sent to the President. Manu Raju has been covering this for Politico and joins us to give us the contours of the compromise this morning. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And along with that spending agreement, the House will consider a separate bill providing about $9 billion in response to this year's disasters and another measure requiring across-the-board cuts in spending to pay for those disasters. Those issues were split into separate measures for votes. The House may also consider today authorizing U.S. intelligence programs and policy for the next year, and members are waiting to hear about an agreement on the payroll tax cut extension, which expires January 1st. The Senate, as we hear, is waiting to get this legislation from the House, both bodies hoping to complete legislative work today so they can leave for the holidays.
Senator from Iowa.
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss a case that was argued a few weeks ago before the Supreme Court, Hall versus the United States. This case involves a specific provision that I authored, which is contained in the 2005 Bankruptcy Reform Law. Throughout the litigation in this case, my statements supporting the provision were discussed at length. So I want to take a few minutes and walk through the history and intent of this provision so people hear it straight from the author's mouth, meaning from this senator. At its core, the case Hall versus the United States is about statutory interpretation. The statute at issue is 11 U.S.C. Section 1222, Pren A, Pren 2, Pren capital A, which was a farm bankruptcy provision added to the Bankruptcy Code in 2005. Before I get into the discussion about the case, I'd like to explain what this particular provision does and why it was needed for me to add it to the Bankruptcy Code. Congress enacted Chapter 12 of the Bankruptcy Code in 1986 and subsequently made it permanent in 2005. Chapter 12 of the Bankruptcy Code allows family farmers to use the bankruptcy process to reorganize their finances and operations. It's a proven success as a leverage tool for farmers and their lenders. It helps the farmer and the banker sit down and work out alternatives for debt repayment. Not long after it became law in 1986, we began to hear about what worked and what didn't work for farmers who were reorganizing in bankruptcy. One problem that we learned arose when a debtor farmer needed to sell assets in order to generate cash for reorganization. A farmer may need to sell portions of the farm to raise cash to fund a plan and pay off its creditors. However, in this situation, we're usually dealing with land that's been in a family's hands for a long time. This means the cost basis is usually very low. So once a farmer filed bankruptcy,
Mr. President.
And then tried to sell.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Could I ask my friend to yield for the colloquy between the Republican leader and myself?
Mr. President, I will yield. I would ask permission to start over again at that point, because these colloquies go on for a long time.
I would ask that the
I'll be glad to
senator
yield.
from...
Can I have the floor?
I would ask consent that his remarks not appear interrupted and that he resume the floor when Senator McConnell and I have finished.
Without objection.
Mr. President, Senator McConnell and I have just finished a meeting. We are making really good progress on being able to handle the issues that everyone knows are outstanding. We're not there yet, but we're very, very close. There will be votes tomorrow. There could be votes this afternoon also. I would also say, because this is a question that people will ask, the House is going to pass their bill around 3 o'clock. That is the omnibus, around 3 o'clock. Time doesn't always, it's not always exact. There's a ruling from this White House and its predecessors that if one house passes a spending bill, as we are doing here, and there's a presumption it'll pass in the other body, the time is extended for 24 hours. So everyone doesn't have to worry about the government closing tonight.
Mr. President, let me just echo the remarks of the majority leaders. He's indicated the administration takes the view that if the final appropriation bills pass one house this afternoon, we could have that vote today, or it could be tomorrow, but the administration, I'm told by the majority leader, takes the view that if it's passed one house, it will not be a government shutdown. So I think everybody should be reassured that that's not going to happen. The conference report has been signed, and we're moving toward completing the basic work of government through next September 30th very shortly. On the second issue, the majority leader and I are making significant progress and reaching an agreement on a package that will have bipartisan support, I hope. I think we're going to get to that place, and I share his view that good progress is being made.
President.
Well,
I ask everything that I've said before now on this subject be struck from the record.
without objection.
Mr. President, I'd like to take a few minutes to discuss a case that was argued a few weeks ago before the Supreme Court, Hall versus the United States. This case involves a specific provision that I authored, which is contained in the 2005 Bankruptcy Reform Law. Throughout the litigation in this case, my statements supporting the provision, in other words, the statements that were said here on the floor of the United States Senate and in committee report, were discussed in these cases at length. So I want to take a few minutes and walk through the history and intent of this provision so people hear it straight from this author's mouth, meaning from this senator. At its core, the case Hall versus the United States is about statutory interpretation. The statute at issue is 11 U.S.C. Section 1222A2A, which was a farm bankruptcy provision added to the Bankruptcy Code in 2005. Before I get into the discussion about the case, I'd like to explain what this particular provision does and why it needed to be added to the Bankruptcy Code. Congress enacted Chapter 12 of the Bankruptcy Code in 1986, which was subsequently made permanent in 2005. Chapter 12 allows family farmers to use the bankruptcy process to reorganize their finances and operations. It's a proven success as a leverage tool for farmers and their lenders. It helps the farmer and the banker sit down and work out alternatives for debt repayment. Not long after it became law in 1986, we began to hear about what worked and what didn't work for farmers who were reorganizing in bankruptcy. One problem we learned arose when a debtor farmer needed to sell assets in order to generate cash for reorganization. A farmer may need to sell portions of the farm to raise cash to fund a plan and pay off his creditors. However, in this situation, we're usually dealing with land that's been in the family's hands for a long time. This means that the cost basis is probably very low. So once a farmer filed bankruptcy and then tried to sell a portion or all the land, he would be hit with a substantial capital gains tax. Now, this creates problems because, as originally drafted, Chapter 12 required full payment of all priority claims under Section 507 of the Bankruptcy Code. The only way to avoid this requirement was if the holder of the claim agreed that its claim could be treated differently. Thus, when a farmer sold his land, which resulted in large capital gains, the IRS would have a priority claim against the bankruptcy estate. I'd like to take a moment to explain the concept of bankruptcy estate, which may be a bit confusing. When an individual or a corporation files for bankruptcy and an estate is created, the estate consists of property that is liquidated for the purpose of paying creditors. So in the case of farmers filing a bankruptcy petition under Chapter 12, the farm assets are property of the estate. And according to Section 541A6 of the Bankruptcy Code, the proceeds from the sales of those assets are also property of the estate. So the situation farmers faced was that the IRS held a large priority claim against the bankruptcy estate. Let me take a minute to talk about claims against the estate to understand how we got to where we are today. In this situation, we're dealing with a claim that is based on taxes owed. The Bankruptcy Code says that taxes incurred by the estate are administrative expenses. An administrative expense essentially receives top priority when determining who gets paid what. Thus, the effect this had was that the IRS, with its priority claim, could object to any reorganization plan that didn't provide for full payment of its tax claim. The IRS essentially held veto authority over a family farmer's plan confirmation. In some instances, then, a farmer who sought to sell a portion of his farm to reorganize, pay creditors, and become profitable again was prohibited completely from doing so. After learning of this problem, I started working on a way to fix it. Simply put, I wanted to make sure that family farmers in Chapter 12 case could, in fact, sell portions of their farm to effectively reorganize without the capital gains taxes jeopardizing the reorganization. The very purpose of Chapter 12 and bankruptcy in general is to allow for a fresh start. Unfortunately, this wasn't happening because of the IRS priority. In 1999, I introduced the Safeguarding America's Farms Entering the Year 2000 Act. This bill, among other things, sought to fix the capital gains tax issue. When I introduced the bill, I said that it would, quote, help farmers to reorganize by keeping tax collectors at bay, end of quote. I also explained, and I'll quote again, under current law, farmers often face a crushing tax liability if they need to sell livestock or land in order to reorganize their business affairs. High taxes have caused farmers to lose their farms. Under the Bankruptcy Code, the IRS must be paid in full for any tax liabilities generated during a bankruptcy reorganization. If the farmer can't pay the IRS in full, then he can't keep his farm. This isn't sound policy. Why should the IRS be allowed to veto a farmer's reorganization plan? End of quote. But let me go back to a portion of what I just quoted. These words, then he can't keep his farm. Simply put, if you're in a farming operation and you can continue to farm, and reorganization is keeping you from farming, well, obviously, you don't have a business of farming and you can't farm. And family farms are very important to the economic viability of rural America. The language that I proposed ultimately was enacted in the 2005 bankruptcy reform law. Since the bankruptcy code, the courts and the IRS treated the tax liability as an administrative expense, the new provision created a very narrow exception to that administrative expense. Basically, only in Chapter 12 case, if a farmer sold farmland that resulted in a capital gains liability, then the IRS's claim would not receive priority status. That's the benefit of the legislation that I got passed to reorganization of a family farm, but it's what is in dispute in these particular cases that I'm referring to. Now, instead, the government would have an unsecured claim, which means that they may get paid something, but not necessarily the entire amount. Also, the IRS would no longer be able to veto a plan's confirmation, thus the farmer debtor would be allowed to reorganize. Now, from a bankruptcy point of view, this approach makes complete sense. As I've discussed already, filing a petition creates a bankruptcy estate. The bankruptcy estate then sells the land post-petition, and that results in capital gains that are owed to the IRS. These taxes incurred by the estate post-petition are administrative expenses which receive priority status. So my language, enacted into law in 2005, stripped the priority claims owed to the government in this very specific instance and made them generally unsecured claims. However, since the passage of this legislation, the IRS has made an about-face The government now argues, despite the way it treated this situation for all these years, that the tax liability created is the responsibility of the individual and not the bankruptcy estate. Yet the entire reason that we created this new provision was because of the way the IRS treated the tax liability. The IRS's new position has been argued in federal courts and has received mixed results. So now there's a dispute whether my provision accomplishes what it was designed to do. In 2009, the Eighth Circuit case, Knutson versus IRS, held the provision applies to post-petition sale of farm assets, which is what we're discussing here. Specifically, the Eighth Circuit rejected the IRS's position that the Internal Revenue Code does not recognize a separate taxable entity being created when a debtor files a Chapter 12 petition. Put another way, the IRS is claiming the individual debtor is responsible for tax liability that arises out of a bankruptcy estate action. The Eighth Circuit disagreed and said there's now an exception preventing the IRS from having a priority claim for capital gains. But in the Ninth Circuit, the court there held that there was no exception for post-petition capital gains. In Hall versus the United States, now before the Supreme Court, the Ninth Circuit said the Halls were responsible for the capital gains tax from selling part of their farm during bankruptcy. This holding means that my provision didn't create a narrow exception, even though that's what I intended. Unfortunately, the IRS under the Obama administration is taking a position today that is anti-farmer and the exact opposite of what it said 6 years ago. This about-face on the part of the IRS came only after we made the change in the law. And it became clear that in a very narrow circumstances, the IRS would lose its priority position. I respect the IRS's interest in pursuing tax dollars, but it exhibited a heck of a lot of chutzpah in taking this position. Our policy reasons for this new exception were very simple. The farmers didn't have enough money to pay everyone. We decided that it would be better to let them sell some assets, which would generate cash and help them reorganize, keep farming, and pay their creditors. In making this decision, we realized that someone would have to make a sacrifice. We decided to give farmers a break from government taxes in a very narrow set of circumstances. Now, though, the government is trying to figure out a way to jump back ahead of other creditors and get more money and reversing positions that they held before we passed the legislation, because they want to get around the legislation, which presumably they think that Congress doesn't have a right to change the law and that they ought to follow the law. And these creditors that the IRS is trying to break in front of are small businesses, suppliers, and small local banks that extend credit and supplies to farmers. This is not what we expected would happen when we passed the 2005 bankruptcy law. This is an important issue and an important case that the Supreme Court will decide in coming months. The Supreme Court will decide whether this provision accomplishes my goal, which I've stated. I look forward to seeing how the case is resolved, but rest assured that I'll work to ensure that this policy of protecting family farmers is followed, as that was our clear intent in having this law enacted. Chapter 12 has proven successful as a leverage tool for farmers and their lenders. It helps the farmer and the banker sit down and work out alternatives for debt repayment. Should the court rule that the Internal Revenue Code is inconsistent with the Bankruptcy Code and rule against my intent as the author, I will obviously have to work to remedy that inconsistency because what we did in 2005 is the right thing, and I hope the Supreme Court realizes the history behind and the intent behind our legislation and follow that congressional intent. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arkansas.
I ask that the quorum be rescinded.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. As Arkansans and all Americans do last-minute errands in preparation for Christmas, one stop on the list almost always includes the grocery store. Like many other families, our Christmas traditions include baking cookies. On Christmas Eve, we get together with extended family for lunch. Many holiday memories are centered around the time spent sitting at the table with family and friends. The unfortunate reality is, for more and more people, is that those memories are becoming more distant as more Americans than ever are having difficulty putting food on the table. In fact, recent studies show 1 in 6 Americans are food deprived. Despite Arkansas's reputation as a leader in agriculture production, Arkansans are struggling to provide nutritious, healthy meals for their family. What is most concerning is that nearly 25% of Arkansas kids go to bed hungry. That gives Arkansas the unfortunate distinction of having the worst rate of childhood hunger in the country. While I believe Congress should work identifying a range of legislative improvements and reforms that can be made in federal policy to fight hunger, Washington can't help solve this problem alone. This requires community involvement. Fortunately, we're blessed to have help at the local level from a wide variety of organizations in Arkansas and nationwide that make it their mission to fight hunger. As a co-chair of the Senate Hunger Caucus, Senators Durbin, Lugar, Casey, Moran, and Brown of Ohio and myself put politics aside to raise awareness and recognize the great work underway in our states addressing food insecurity. We call this effort the Hour for Hunger. Our initiative encourages all members of Congress to dedicate 1 hour during this holiday season to highlight the commitments of national, state, and local organizations to fight hunger. Last Friday, I had the opportunity to visit the Samaritan Community Center in Rogers, Arkansas. For more than 20 years, this organization has lent a helping hand to the hungry through soup kitchens, food pantries, snack packs for kids, and a variety of other initiatives. This help is needed now more than ever. The economy is forcing more people to rely on the services of Samaritan Community Center. In just 3 years, there has been more than a 50% increase in clients. This is the story with similar organizations throughout Arkansas and really throughout the country. In a segment that aired last month, CNN focused on the extent of the hunger problem in Arkansas' second largest city, Fort Smith. Ken, the marketing director for the River Valley Regional Food Bank in Fort Smith, told CNN some heart-wrenching stories encountered while helping those in need. Ken spoke of a mother who used to volunteer at a food pantry and is now in need of the organization's services due to mounting medical bills for her children. He recounted the story of an elderly lady who went from financial security to sorting through the dumpster garbage at the local grocery store after her husband passed away and her monthly income disappeared. Unfortunately, similar stories can be heard throughout our state and throughout the nation. Community-based efforts like those in Fort Smith are making a difference to address hunger and malnourishment. We're seeing it across the state of Arkansas. Last week, the NBC affiliate KARK in Little Rock spent the week urging viewers to donate to the Arkansas Food Bank. The Greater Food Week of Giving donation drive will undoubtedly provide many blessings to many families during the holiday season. It's painfully clear that our economic environment is intensifying our hunger issues in Arkansas and across the country. The fact is we don't have to look far to see how hunger hurts. I believe hunger is a solvable problem, but it requires us all working together. Please consider what you can do to help neighbors in need, again, not just during this holiday season, but all year long. I yield back my time.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, we are, as a nation, facing difficult financial times, and I, for one, believe it is true that the middle class in America is suffering economically to a degree that is unusual. It needs to be thought about. It needs to be addressed. I have a number of ideas about what we should do. It doesn't include raising taxes and spreading money around. I don't believe that's the right direction for the country to go. That's essentially the view of President Obama. As he says, he's for the middle class. He taxes people even higher at the higher levels and do those kind of government programs that he believes will work. But at a most fundamental level, I'm convinced that the greatest things we can do to strengthen America, strengthen us financially, strengthen job creation for the middle class would be to do the things that allow growth in the private sector. There's a lot of things that we can do that will not cost this Treasury a dime. And indeed, one of the greatest threats to the American economy is the debt that hangs over us like a cloud. It's inhibiting growth and investment and prosperity. We've got to get this nation on a sustainable path, not the unsustainable path we're on. And I've been disappointed, frankly, at the leadership of the President. I think he's not understood this, and he's believed that the way to do it is through Keynesian governmental borrowing, taxing, and spending. And that's just not the way to get out of this fix. One of the most dramatic things that that's coming up before us today is the Keystone Pipeline. This is precisely the kind of thing that this Congress should take action on to ensure that occurs, because it will create jobs, lots of jobs, create wealth, make us more secure as a nation, and help bring down the cost of energy. And lower cost energy is one of the best possible ways to create even more jobs in America, because we compete in a global marketplace, and the extent to which our industries can have cheaper energy, they can hire more people, make more widgets, and pay more taxes to the United States government and to state and cities and counties. So the construction of the pipeline would run from Alberta, Canada, to Texas refineries along the Gulf Coast. It adds a lot of miles, a number of miles to the pipeline, although it will use existing pipelines that are in place now. We have thousands and thousands of miles of pipelines around the United States. Building a pipeline is not an unusual thing. We have them over and over again. Through our state, many pipelines run, and they provide the low-cost energy that helps us be competitive and helps create jobs. This construction project alone would add 20,000 American workers, high-paid American workers, jobs not funded by additional debt that we borrow in the United States to try to artificially create jobs, real construction jobs. And it would likely lead, experts tell us, to the creation of more than 100,000 jobs overall. Well, this is a significant number of jobs. And in addition, as I said, would make us more energy secure and make us more able to contain the growth in the price of fuel, because it would provide a large competitive source of fuel for America. When fully operational, the pipeline would transport 700,000 barrels a day. That's almost half of the amount of oil the United States currently imports from the entire Middle East. 700,000 barrels a day is almost exactly the amount of oil we import from Venezuela. And that's not a friendly country to us. Hugo Chavez and his team there are a dangerous threat, I believe, to the hemisphere. Much of their wealth comes from oil that they sell to the United States. I'm not saying we can't buy on the world market and that we shouldn't buy from Venezuela, but why in the world would we deny ourselves the right to purchase 700,000 barrels a day from our friend, our fine trading partner, Canada, our neighbor? This is strategic political interest of significance, too. How will the Canadians feel if we reject this pipeline when great effort and time, years of investment and study have gone into it? So this plan to build a pipeline is supported by a bipartisan coalition, Democrats and Republicans, including many Democratic governors, such as Montana Governor Brian Schweitzer, along with a number of Democratic senators and congressmen here in the Congress. It's not a partisan issue. 7 governors whose states will house a pipeline have come out to voice their support. Each state through which the pipeline will pass is supportive now of the pipeline. Those encouraging the pipeline also include labor unions, such as the Teamsters, that together represent 25 million workers. Remember that this is a job program, creating high-paid jobs. Many of these will be union workers. Yet the President has blocked the pipeline construction for some time, deferring a decision now until after the next election. Many argue, and it's hard not to conclude, that this is a political decision, an attempt to avoid having to alienate either the liberal anti-energy environmentalist supporters or those who favor the pipeline, like his union supporters. I don't know the politics of it. All I know is that I cannot find a single sound reason not to proceed with this, and I know it would be tremendously economically beneficial to America. We must address the true structural long-term problems that are hammering our economy and middle-class workers in America, robbing them of opportunity. We had before the Environmental Committee just a couple of days ago a witness from Alabama Van Ritchie, who's the CEO at SIPCO, a company over 100 years old, owned by the employees, a company in which the CEO, owner, a number of years ago turned it over to the employees. Their number of employees has gone from 4,600 to 2,900. The testimony was that the pipe industry in America is down 30%, the entire pipe industry. Think about that. These are real jobs, people who've built their lives around good-paying work at a SIPCO. Over 1,000 of them are now not working. I don't know what they're doing. Hopefully they found something, but it's unlikely to be the kind of solid manufacturing job that they have. So we must pursue reforms that make our economy stronger and more productive, restoring confidence and allowing for sustained economic job growth. Consider a few of the biggest challenges we face. One of them is the health care law. Promises were made. The President insisted it would reduce health care costs. But health insurance premiums have increased $2,200 per family since 2008. And the Congressional Budget Office warned us that this health care bill was not going to bring down cost. And in fact, the bill has brought up cost. That's money out of the pocket of American families. They don't have now to spend in the marketplace. It's got to be spent on their health insurance. So we need to get the government out of dominating and regulating areas of the economy for which they have no experience or ability to operate in an effective way. Instead of allowing the production of American energy from this country, The President has blocked common sense energy production while sending stimulus dollars to favored green corporations that are not producing, going bankrupt in serious numbers. A recent study found that almost 190,000 new jobs could be created next year if energy production in the Gulf of Mexico, where I live, returned to pre-moratorium levels. Think about that. If we just went back to the pre-moratorium levels on production, it would add 190,000 jobs, bring in more American wealth. Instead of having to buy our oil from Canada or Venezuela, it would be our own, keeping our wealth at home, creating jobs at home. The moratorium was imposed after the oil spill, and we had expert testimony in the Environment Committee that there's a new device that's been prepared, now ready to go, that could be put over a blown-out well like that in a matter of days, stop the leak. They eventually did that using a cap. Now, instead of 90 days or 100 days, within a few days, you could cut off a leak like that. It should have been there to begin with, in my opinion. Very, very significant failure of management not to have such a safety device, but it's now available, and I do believe that the permitorium, the inability to get permits now that the complete ban is over, you can get permits, but they've been slowed down dramatically. Huge rigs capable of drilling in the deep Gulf have been moved to other places in the world and are not producing. This cost us a lot of jobs. It would have cost the United States taxpayers virtually nothing to put an intensive effort into reviewing the dangers in the Gulf, doing it quickly, and gotten this industry back on track before so many of the production rigs have moved abroad. Also, burdensome, intrusive regulations have undermined job creation and hurt small businesses. The average number of rules costing the economy over $100 million, pending during 2001 to 2006, was about 72. Under this administration, the average number is 130. In fact, over 180,000 jobs will be lost each year from 2012 to 2020 as a result of just 4 EPA rules that impact the regulatory structure of the electric industry. These are dramatic events. It would cost the Treasury of the United States not a dime to not follow through on these dramatic rules, one of which is the Boiler Mac rule that I've never heard so much concern from my constituents over that rule, and it is hopefully will be part of the legislation that moves the Payroll Tax Holiday. That legislation would also change the Boiler Mac rule. That would be a tremendous relief for the American economy. But the point is, these rules cost the economy, cost jobs, drive up our cost of production, and makes it more difficult to be competitive in the world marketplace. We don't need that. Every single rule that's effective needs to be maintained. Every single rule that's unnecessary and drives up costs should be eliminated. And we're still adding rule after rule, and it's costing jobs. President Obama has continued to ignore China's abusive currency devaluation process, which undermines the rule of law and is decimating American manufacturing. I was pleased to work with my Democratic colleagues in the Senate to pass legislation that would require the government to respond to legitimate complaints of businesses who can prove that they've been damaged by the deliberate manipulation of China currency. You can't have a good trading relationship with a country that's cheating you, that's not playing by the rules, And we're just going to sit by year after year and allow factory after factory to be closed because we're unwilling to confront this on some sort of religious economic free trade theory that, oh, if they sell us cheaper products and put our businesses out of work and close them down and lay off thousands of workers, we should just thank them because we get a cheaper product. But how long will it be cheaper? I don't go for that. I think we need real leadership here, that it wouldn't cost the Treasury a dime, but if we stood up and protected our workers on the world competitive stage and backed them up and ensured our businesses have fair trade, we'd create jobs without adding to the debt. We'd create jobs that pay more taxes and reduce the debt. So this trade manipulation and unfairness does enormous damage to the middle class. The number of U.S. manufacturing sites, fell from 397,000 in 2001 to 344,000 in June of 2010. That's a real manufacturing decline. It is not inevitable. In fact, I am convinced that we have a chance to have a renaissance in manufacturing in America. If we keep our energy costs down, we don't have unnecessary regulations, we create a tax policy that's good, I think we might surprise ourselves how well we can bounce back, because the cost of manufacturing in other countries is going up dramatically. And we have now, with our technology, our infrastructure, our high machinery utilization, can be competitive in areas that we haven't been competitive in before. Manufacturing employment, which peaked at 19 million in 1979, was 11.7 million in February of 2011. I don't think this country can be healthy and strong economically. It can be have an effective presence strategically and militarily around the world if we don't have a manufacturing base. I don't see how it can happen. What are people going to do? Well, they say we'll go into service industries. Well, how many people can make a computer? Matter of fact, most of these technological advancements like our super TVs and computers, many of those are made abroad. It's a competitive world, but we can be more competitive. We can take back some of that manufacturing, I'm convinced. I also believe that at a time of high unemployment, we need to be sure that the immigration laws of this country are enforced. The very idea that we should relax our laws and shouldn't insist that they be enforced at a time when we've got 9% almost unemployment makes no sense to me. We need to get American workers working, not import workers to take jobs from Americans. That's just simple. We have to protect our legitimate national interest. If you're going to have open borders, I'll be willing to discuss that and say, should we have just totally open borders? But if you don't, and no nation in the world does, to my knowledge, then then you create an immigration system that serves your national interest, and it creates jobs for American citizens wherever possible. America's $15 trillion debt is destroying jobs and confidence in the economy. The debt itself, the largest we've ever seen, the annual deficits are the largest we've ever seen. They dwarf any deficits we've ever had before, and they're consistently continuing year after year. We had President Bush's last year in office had the biggest deficit he ever had, $450 billion, one of the largest deficits in the history of the Republic. President Obama's first year in office was $1.3 trillion deficit, $1,300 billion deficit. It's been 1.3, 1.2 trillion for the last 3 years. This year they were predicting that the deficit would come in at just a tad under $1 trillion, $970 billion. But do you know what? If we pass this tax holiday, that'll add $200 billion to the debt, almost like that. So next year we'll be at $1.1+ trillion if the Congressional Budget Office projections are true. So this is a serious matter. The debt is a threat to us. We've got to quit running up the debt. We've got to quit borrowing so we can spend. And that's all this tax holiday is. The government borrows the money so that people don't pay into their pension plan, Social Security. I'm uneasy about that. It weakens the moral component of Social Security, and it clearly adds to our debt. Social Security is on an unsustainable course. This bill would do nothing to fix the unsustainable course of Social Security, but it just says we don't put in the money we've been putting in every year for the last 60 years, I suppose. How can that do anything but weaken Social Security? And it absolutely increases our debt. And it will show up on the score by the Congressional Budget Office. I'm ranking Republican on the Budget Committee. It is so painful. I would love to be able to support, and won't say I won't support this tax holiday, but it is not sound policy in the long run for America. We can't keep chasing after borrowing money to spend it because the debt is so large. We now have a debt equal to 100% of GDP, our gross debt. We've never had anything like this before. So it's time indeed for a middle-class agenda, an agenda that helps and strengthens this country. We don't need more dishonest spending, politicians promising favor, promising to give people something that the government doesn't have to give, spending money we don't have to try to buy votes with it. We don't need any more of that. The net beneficiary of all this seems to have been the political class, not the middle class. So what do we need to do? A good, sound program means creating jobs through the private sector, putting a stop to crony capitalism and favoritism, producing more American energy, making the government lean, our government leaner and more productive. That's good for the economy. Creating a long-term debt reduction plan so every investor and business person and American citizens will say, well, we're on a path now that's sustainable, not on a path that's unsustainable, as every economist has told us. Adopting a globally competitive tax code, a tax code that enhances investment in America, enhances expansion and job creation, not one that inhibits growth and job creation. We need to confront illegal immigration at the border and at the workplace and serve the national interest. We need to uphold the rules of law in trade and quit acquiescing to those who cheat and manipulate trade rules to their advantage. I don't believe you can sustain that over a long period of time. I do believe that has hammered jobs in manufacturing in America. We need to eliminate unwise and damaging regulations. Any burden placed on individual Americans or business in America that does not pay for itself in benefits should never be imposed. And we've got too much in that category. And finally, delivering the good people of this country the honest and responsible government and budget they deserve. And the sad fact is that we've now, this day, we have gone 961 days without a budget. And that shows, I think, the irresponsibility of this Congress. I was disappointed when the Democratic leader in the Senate said it would be foolish to even attempt to bring up a budget this year, and he was not going to do it. for the second year. And this is really, really dangerous. A country that's suffering the greatest debt and deficits we've ever had, to not have a budget is utterly and totally unacceptable. And I can't imagine a party wanting to be the leader of the Senate that won't even bring to the floor a budget as required by statute, required by law. The House passed one. They passed a historic budget, a budget that would have altered the debt course of America, put us on a sound path. The Republican leadership over there summoned their courage and produced a budget that reduced spending, altered taxes in America in a way that would create more growth, and brought it forward. So Senator Reid thought he was clever. He knew his Democrats wouldn't vote for it because it actually cut spending, and he brought it up so it could be voted down. But over 40 people voted for it. I brought up at the same time President Obama's budget, the most irresponsible budget ever submitted, one that would increase taxes, but increase spending more and increase debt more than if we didn't have that budget. So I brought it up and said, well, let's vote on the President's budget. 0 votes, 97-0 against that budget. So I'm telling you, we need to be sure that the people who run this country understand that the American people are not happy with us. How can they be happy? We're borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. We're on an unsustainable debt course, and we don't even have a budget and refuse to bring one up. It's just unthinkable. We'll end up here in the last of this session, heading into Christmas, with some conglomerated together massive omnibus bill, a last-minute tax holiday bill, and somehow we'll muddle forward and continue spending for the government so it won't close down. But all of this should have been done months ago. There's no reason it has to be held to the last, except that it gives the leaders more power to manipulate and gives the actual members of Congress less opportunity to know what's in it, gives the American people less opportunity to know what's in it. So I'm not happy. I don't think the American people are. I think they are rightly disappointed with us. Somehow we've got to get this country on the right track. It will require tightening our belts. We cannot continue to borrow and spend at this rate. A lot of people are going to be disappointed that things they hope to receive, they will no longer be able to receive. But the country will not sink into the ocean. It will not. This country is strong. All we've got to do is do what they're doing in New Jersey and doing in Alabama, beginning to do in some of the other states that have been deeply in debt. Doing what Senator Warner did as governor of Virginia, manage his economy, balance his budget, and I appreciate his leadership in the Congress and the Senate to try to produce something worthwhile for the nation. So we can do better, and we've got to do better, and the American people are entitled to it. I thank the chair. Would you yield the floor?